That's okay.
Go ahead.
So, Father, Mother, God, we ask for the clearing. We ask for God's love and God's light. We ask for alignment with our soul's purpose. We ask for healing, balancing, and clearing in line with the highest good. So be it.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for your time and doing this interview with me. And
No problem. It's a pleasure I like talking about this stuff, so it's good.
yeah, that's good. And so in this interview, I'd just like to understand your personal experience on your NDE account. And just hoping to gain more of an insight into what NDE is and how it affects your life. And so for the interview, I like to, it would be amazing if you can integrate my questions into your answer.
Okay.
So that way, when I edit the video, it wouldn't seem as repetitive.
Okay.
If that's all right, yeah, it would be amazing if you could do that. Right.
Yeah.
So, right. So, could you tell me a bit about yourself and your background growing up?
My background, I was born in Portchester, New York, in the USA, in a upper middle class Jewish family. And so I lived in the suburbs, and I, went to school there, went through high school and everything, and then I went to undergraduate school in Arizona. I loved playing sports when I was a kid. That was a big focus for me. I wasn't a very good student. Luckily, I was very smart in math and science, so I did okay in those subjects. Some subjects I barely got buy-in, to tell you the truth, but I made it through school. And then after, along the years, there were little influences to me about getting involved with spiritual things. I sort of became interested in psychology when I was younger, and so I forgot to integrate the part of the question. So I'm talking about my life growing up a bit, and just little things would happen. Like one thing over the summer when I'd say in my late teens, I took a class at one of the state universities, and there was a cute girl in the class. And, I wanted to connect with her, and I talked to her, and she told me she was taking a yoga class at the school. So I went to the yoga class. It ended up she didn't show up to the class, but I enjoyed yoga. It was sort of integrating physical stuff like sports almost with more spiritual things, and that was one of the first things that really got me interested in this. My dad was an electrical contractor, so I learned a lot about construction, and that it definitely started getting in some trouble with doing drugs. And I never drank, but smoked a lot of pot and did other drugs also when I was in high school. So.
Yeah. So right. So this so right now I'd like you to take a moment and go back to the day your ND took place, and just take your time and start when you're ready, and tell me in full detail what happened that day.
Okay, that day I had been living in Colorado at the time, actually working in a restaurant. I came back to Rye Brook, New York to visit my parents. So the part of Portchester where I lived when I was much younger changed to be called Rye Brook, New York. It was the same place. So when I got back, I drove back with a friend of mine, so 2,000 miles, whatever, and a friend, another girl that I was interested in, was having a party, and I went to the party. I definitely was drinking some and did some drugs, and I had borrowed my mother's car. And I had a sense I shouldn't drive home, so I asked my friend to drive me home, who was not high. And when I almost, oh, back to my parents, when I almost got back there, I realized my sister needed the car in the morning. The truth was, part of the reason I even asked him to drive me home was sort of a ploy to be able to go back and meet, talk to the girl the next day who was having the party. So unfortunately, I had taken some drugs during that time, and they didn't affect me yet. And so I went to drive home, and I don't remember, I sort of remember leaving the party, but I don't remember anything after that. Then I obviously, from evidence, I drove into a tree. I was not aware of that, but then I had the experience of leaving my body and being in, it wasn't a tunnel going into the white light like a lot of people say. It was just in this place that was very filled with bright white light. And it was a very kinesthetic feeling for me. It just felt it wasn't physical, but what my spiritual body felt wonderful. It just felt like this great amount of love around me. It was like a understanding of the human situation, and just that everything was good. And so I saw my body, it was leaning against a tree, and there was a policeman kneeling over me. I assumed he took me out of the car, although I did not see that part of it. My head was, I still have a scar. My head was the skin was open on my head so you could see inside. And then again, the feeling, it was more of a feeling than knowing in my mind, but a knowing, like maybe you could say in your heart, or people say you have a gut feeling. It was more like that how good everything was. Then there were, again, I don't have a visual memory of that, but I had a sense that there were two different, at the time I didn't even know what to make of it, so these words I put on after, there were two beings behind me. One of them seemed to be very, very big, like all-encompassing. The other one was smaller, that seemed more like, I assumed, in a human type form but again, my head wasn't facing that way. So then the smaller being said, "You have to go back, your father wants you to stay." I knew at that time it wasn't my physical father, but the spiritual father. So I went back into my body, just thinking everything was good, and then I woke up 3 days later in the hospital. My describing what happened has always been evolving over the years, just trying to understand. But shortly after that near-death experience, I met someone who was a spiritual teacher, and he started to talk to me about two different things. One was the ocean of divine love and benevolence, and I thought, oh, that's what I was experiencing in the white light. Just this love, this divine love, and the benevolence, just like everything was okay. He also started to talk to me about Jesus and Mary, and I thought, oh, that being behind me was Jesus, and that the bigger being was God. But at the time, nowadays, people weren't even talking about near-death experiences, so to even think of that or talk about it, it wasn't even in my vocabulary at all. So a lot of my mental understanding and the words put on it came after the fact. But those words still today really describe my experience.
Thank you. That's great. How long did you feel like when you were in? How long did it feel like when you were in your NDE?
It seemed like just a few minutes. It was interesting because I post things online, which I guess is what you saw. I wonder what else happened, because someone posted something online saying they didn't remember anything. I was unconscious for 3 days. I assume, how it affected my life seems so much more than what happened during the near-death experience. So I was just wondering, I wonder what else happened during that time, because it was, my intuition really increased, and I started to notice when I touched people, my hands became warm after that. Again, it's our perception today would start to make sense of that, like, oh yeah, there was some incredible thing happen. But I didn't think that way because I didn't know that. Most of my reference about these kind of things were in science fiction. And, that was a little bit helping me accept it, but I didn't really tell anyone of my experience for quite a while.
And that kind of leads up to my question as since when did you start telling people your NDE?
Well, when I met this spiritual teacher, I found out he had an NDE, and then I told people a little bit. I barely mentioned it for years, and a few years ago, I was teaching a class at the University of Bridgeport in Connecticut on mindfulness. I wrote my doctoral treatise on breathing and mindfulness, and after the class, the woman said, "Oh, I'm teaching a class on death and dying." And I just mentioned, "Oh, I had a near-death experience," and she got all excited about it. And I posted something online. I'm going to be teaching this class on death and dying on Facebook, and so many people responded like they were interested, and it just opened my eyes to that people are interested in these things these days. So before that, and that was, so I'm trying to think of how many years ago. Like 35 years, I didn't really mention it very much to people, and then all of a sudden everyone seems interested, and it's kind of a relief to talk about it. It was almost like feeling ashamed, like people would think I'm crazy, or so it was like a cathartic experience to be able to do that. And since then I've taught classes and started giving lectures and stuff, and it just feels really good to share that with people.
Yeah, and like the internet really helps as well, because you meet a lot of like people who've gone through the same kind of experience, and they're like open to talk about it.
Yeah, I always meet people. Even right after, I met a number of people that did, and with those people you could sort of talk about it, but even then it was not, it seems like people become very spiritual, and the subject was spiritual, about spiritual stuff. I studied different religions. For a while I did study death. We didn't talk about near-death experiences though, but there's like the Tibetan Book of the Dead, things like that people are trying to study that, but it's a little bit different. Like now it's kind of popular, and then it was not, so. But it's funny because a friend of mine who I've known for probably 7 years, and I mentioned this to her, these kind of things a lot, and I was giving a talk at the Unitarian Church, and she set it up for me, and just before the talk she said, "Oh, you should ask the audience if they've had similar experiences," and she mentioned to me an experience she had when she was young, not a near-death experience, but an experience of leaving her body when she was young. And all these years, it was funny because I thought, this is someone who's a good friend of mine who hasn't had those experiences. And that was kind of unique. And then she tells me, I didn't say to her, but I'm thinking, why didn't you tell me this years ago, when I first mentioned it? So, but I think in general, it's sort of like coming out of the closet type of thing. It's like you can all of a sudden share this about your life. It feels good.
I can imagine. So you mentioned how you saw figures and
Yes.
how they spoke to you, and then afterwards you came back to your body. So do you feel like it was your choice coming back to our shared reality?
Or the physical reality? Yes. Was it my choice to come back? I didn't have a second thought when the voice said, "You have to go back, your father wants you to stay." It was from this place of that everything is so all right. I sort of joke around if I thought of it, and I guess in a lot of ways I'm kind of naive about many things. I tend to look at people as being good, and I have to learn to take care of myself because, I like to think inside of everyone there is something good, but a lot of people don't express that. So it wasn't a choice. I know some of the stories people have said they had a choice, but I don't know if I had a choice. I didn't think of that. I suppose if the voice said that and I thought of, well, I don't want to, then I would have found out if I did have a choice. So I don't know.
Has your perception of reality changed since the NDE?
Yes, without a doubt. A big thing that happened, it really started a spiritual journey for me where I just had this great desire to learn a lot. A lot of my gifts have developed over the years and meeting people that taught me stuff, and sometimes in the same way it was like just an experiential learning in my NDE, sometimes with these people experiential, like it's like a direct transmission, and so I learn more, and there's just an opening, yes, it really changed my life to be on the spiritual path. Sometimes it's I say it was like a kick in the butt to do that, and sometimes it's a pain in the butt because the things that are normally the focus of one's life, like perhaps making money or things like that, take a back seat to my spiritual drive and wanting to learn. And I do healing work and counseling work with people. I am so committed to doing a good job, and so it requires always learning and checking with other people to make sure whatever's going on in me is not like my ego's not taking over, and it's that I'm really doing the right thing. So it's work, yes, and it's even now I say that it's like I just want to know more. There's something pulling me in that direction that was not there before, definitely.
So you talked about having these gifts after you come back.
Yes.
By that you mean could you elaborate on the gifts bit?
Yes, when I came back, I started to experience my intuition really increased. I just seemed to know certain things about people. I also start to notice when I touch people that my hands became warm. Again, from the perspective of I have no clue what this is, and sort of being skeptical about the whole thing and not having the reference like today of everyone talking about it. As I said, most of my reference was from the original Star Trek series. And so I explored that and started learning certain healing techniques and stuff like that. But yeah, so I've developed that over the years, but I don't take it for granted. I don't assume that I know anything. I'm always questioning what I know. Even when I work with people, sometimes I'll see something, and unless I 100% know what it is, I'll tell them, well, I see this. What do you think it is? Like, what does it mean to you? And a lot of times they'll know what it is even more than I do because they have the reference of their life. But what happens is a lot of times I can hear the tone in their voice or feel energetically that things shift in a positive direction for them.
So you can sense energy, basically.
Yes, I can sense a lot of things, and it changes from situation to situation exactly what that is. Like sometimes I know very specific things about people. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I'll know, like it is a sense of energy. Sometimes I'll see negative spiritual forms around people. Sometimes I'll have a sense of what's going on physically, and it does change. And part of what I've learned is just to keep my mind very open. Probably if I would look for any one thing, I could see something. But when I'm talking to someone, I'm just sort of letting their being or something in them sort of take the lead of what it is I'm supposed to see that's really best for them.
So would you say NDE enhanced your senses?
Yes. I'm hesitating because it enhanced certain senses, and I guess it wasn't really my physical senses. It was more my intuitive senses. It did seem to enhance my sensitivity and intuition when touching people too. Like I would just seem to know what's out of balance in their body. So it enhanced those senses, yes.
So you talked about doing like drugs when you were young and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And just wondering, do you think could your NDE have been a hallucination or a dream, and why or why not?
I know what happened, but when you ask that question, there's no way I could know for sure, just knowing what an hallucination is. And I had done drugs that caused hallucinations. They didn't look as real as what I see looks, but there's no way to know that. And sometimes people say to me, how do you know it's not all in your head? And the answer is, I don't know if that matters, because when I help someone, I help them. And that part, there's really no denying that, because people feel stuff. Do you know what I mean? There's no way to know the answer to that. My experience is my experience, and inside of me, I know that. But to be the real scientist about it, which is what I want to be, because I don't want to take this stuff for granted, there's really no, it's not like there's something physically concrete you can check to make sure. But when I work with someone and they feel, especially if it's physical symptoms and it gets better, that is concrete evidence. Is it all in their head? I don't know. Does it really matter? It's like they're getting better. So I don't know. People ask me that all the time, and there's just no way to know. It's not like a brick wall is solid. If you hit the brick wall, it's a brick wall. If it's even believing in God, there's no way to prove that. That's, there's no way. So, right, even that, you hesitate with that word. It's, it's whatever it is, they're feeling better, they're doing better. I mean, a few months ago, something happened like in 3 different phone calls. It was kind of cool because something in the 3 different people, something in their life shifted. It was 2 people in a business deal. Both of them were saying the deal had gone south and wasn't going to happen. Near the end of the call, they got a text saying everything was okay. And both of them said, how do you do that? And I said, in one way, I don't really know. It's really just putting a lot of love and this energy into the situation. And in what I see, it looks clearer. The other one, someone else said the same thing. Like, they got a text from someone in their life saying something changed. And it was like, so it's kind of cool. Do I know exactly how it happened? No. I do know I use my creative imagination. I can see something like these people are not connecting to this very positive energy that I would like to think is God, but then, we're talking about things that it's not the brick wall. So it's, but then when things get better in their life and they feel happier, that seems to answer the question in the best way.
Right. So my next question is, do you think everything happens for a reason, including your NDE, and what's the reason?
I think the answer to your question is yes, although it's more like there's, it's like something unfolding. So it's not like a reason from the outside, it's more something from the inside going out. So I think there's some variables that could happen, that it could be different. I do know my ND, I describe it a lot, it was like a kick in the butt to get involved with these things. I've had other things in my life happen like that. That was obviously the most drastic because it was, I could have died. I had another car accident one time. Something happened and it caused a big change in my life too. I didn't get hurt, but it was the way that it happened was I was driving down the road. There was a big curve in the front of my house, before my house on the road, and it was snowy and ice out, and I knew I had to go slow, and I saw a car coming the other direction. I knew he was going too fast, so I stopped before the curve, and he started to skid out away from the curve, and then all of a sudden, for some reason, his car stopped and did like, not a 360, but almost in the opposite direction and hit me, even though I stopped. It was almost like that. I mean, it just almost seemed physically impossible to happen. It crashed my car, and I had to move. I was involved with someone in a relationship that it sort of ended that relationship almost by hitting my car. And but that, yes, I do. I think the answer to your question is yes, but I think it's because of there's part of us that is directing us in a way. There's another part of us that doesn't get it sometimes, and then these things happen to give us a kick in the butt and get us on the right track.
So my last question is, what is the most important thing that you learned from your NDE?
I guess I would say that God loves us, and there is this loving energy that's available. And even now, when you ask me that, I start to go into my head, and then it's like, oh no, I can check in my heart, and it's like, then I know. And that is a choice everyone has every moment, all the time, to check in your heart and check in with that loving. And then I think of it, and I see all the people in my life in a different light. I have a 15-year-old daughter, and she does great in school, and it's a good example because if she gets below a 90 in anything, I get all nervous. It's like, oh no, I need to check in my heart in that loving. And I just love her more than anything. And then it's just this wonderful experience, and that is available. And I know some situations it's very hard to imagine that because they're pretty bad situations in the world, but I would say that's the biggest thing. And plus I've learned how to help people. I've really helped people with, I've had people come to me that go to doctors that can't get better, they get better, their psychological problems, business problems. It's kind of a cool thing to help people.
So if it's possible, could I get you to talk about one of your clients and how you help using your gift and helping that person?
Yes. Yeah.
I'm just I've done a number of interviews. I'm going to just take a moment and try to think of one that I haven't talked about, but I don't know. Obviously they're really, a lot of people it's more over time. Obviously the people that get fixed almost instantly is very dramatic and good for business. So there's a woman that that I talked to. This is it's kind of a small. I'll actually share two things. One is because this is someone who lives somewhere, and she moved into an area with her husband thinking the area was going to get nicer. And it wasn't a terrible area, but it wasn't the greatest, but it seemed like it was building up, and the area really went downhill, and it was really bothering her. And because of their financial situation, and they're not poor by any means, it's just they couldn't really afford to. The nicer areas around them cost much more money. And so I just kept she said, she was saying, but this. I said, you got to look for another place to live. It ended up, there's just a lot of homeless people around there. And when she goes out of her apartment, she doesn't feel safe, or she didn't feel safe. And I kept saying, what you're saying makes sense, but my intuition is telling me to tell you to keep looking. And something happened where she talked to a realtor, and right at the right time, someone had to evict someone out of their apartment who was subleasing their apartment. It's a nicer area, a nicer apartment for less money than they were paying before. And she was in this place of giving up on that. That's kind of a small thing, really. The other one happened some years ago. A longtime client of mine sort of pushed her friend to come see me. Her friend had had a miscarriage, and her reproductive system was in very bad shape. It started to affect the rest of her health, and her friend pushed her to come see me, basically. She didn't believe in what I did. When I saw her, I knew I could help her right away. After 2 sessions, she wrote me an email saying, I don't know what you do, but the doctors say I'm getting better. And it was good. And then I sort of pushed her to have one more session, even though she knew she was getting better. And then I'd say about 2 years later, so in the beginning of the story, the doctors had said to her, there's no way you're ever going to have a baby. And then about 2 years later, I heard from her friend that she had a baby. And that was like, that's really cool. And, when I'm working, all these things seem normal, and I didn't really appreciate that. After the story at the University of Bridgeport, when I taught the near-death experience class, I was looking through my old emails, like things to post and it was around Thanksgiving, to be grateful for. And I read these emails, and it was like, wow, that's a really cool thing. At that time, I was able to look at what has happened to me and really appreciate it. Before that, even though I was doing these great things, I was very shy, or, like I felt like I had to hide all the time about it. So it was a good experience for them, and it was a great experience for me.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So, you talked about you still learning, and you
Yes.
still learning new things, and I'm just wondering, what is your goal, and what do you aim to become, or what do you want to learn?
I don't know if there's a goal. I think learning is part of the goal. I just like to learn more about myself and be able to help people more. Part of it is, it's like an inner struggle of, like I said, my ego, and I've normal feelings like normal people, getting angry, getting pissed off, feeling like I don't have enough money. Just learning how to stay focused on the positive, focused on that loving. I'm always looking to help people more. I don't know what the goal would be. I feel when I can look at it in a neutral way, it's like I'm sort of living my goal. But I mean, who wouldn't like to have more money? I'd love to be rolling in, millions of dollars coming in. I have, some of my goals are for my daughter. She's 15. I want her to go to a good college. Normal goals people have, pretty much. But I study spiritual things all the time to learn more about that. I don't know. In one way, it's not like it's moving, but it's something I have this great drive to learn more about. And sometimes I learn something, I go, wow, I already knew that, but it seems to be learning it at a new level. This past summer, I was feeling a lot of sadness, and I didn't really know what it was about. And I started to realize it was just my heart's center and my spiritual loving opening up more. And that the first thought is, oh, that's a good thing. Then I'm thinking, man, how many years am I going to have to do this? How long is it going to take to learn it? And in my mind, I know it's a never-ending process to do more and to see things more clearly spiritually, to see things for myself, for my children, my clients, things like that.
Great. So love is the answer for a lot of things.
Yes, I think love is. I actually have been in the process of writing a book for a long time, and it's called A Movement Towards Love. And then there's like underneath it, stumbling, rumbling, and bumbling into the heart of God. And that's sort of what it's like. It's like you don't know where you're going, but I got to keep going, basically. So
It's very inspiring.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Thanks. I like to think so.
Yeah, I think it is a very very profound idea, and it was a really great talking. It was really great talking to you.